Hello, you wonderful people, you. I'm Dracthonia, and I'm here to help you in your journey towards your best self, one game at a time. Today, I thought we'd talk about how to deal with those pesky loot goblin players and how to stop gear feeling unrewarding and ultimately pointless. So here's 4 tips and maybe a little bonus one on how to deal with hoarders. Let's get into it, shall we? I've been a gamer, RPG enthusiast and D&D addict for well over 10 years now, and I wanted to start this video series to help you in your to aid you in your exploration of how games could help you come out of your shell, expand your creativity, and improve your mental health, along with a whole host of other cool benefits. So do smash that subscribe button to keep up to date with all of our D&D videos. Aside from my demented DM ramblings on YouTube, I also play games and do a podcast highlighting marginalized content creators on Twitch. So why not have a gander down in the description for a link. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm here to talk about 4 ways in which you can stop your players turning into loot goblins. But first, let's address the fact, the elephant in the room. Everyone loves loot. Like, sparkly, shiny things is one of the key elements that makes games like Diablo and Borderlands as appealing and even humorous as they are. Heck, there's even a board game, Munchkin, that is basically all about getting lots of awesome gear from bullying monsters and other players with your hefty 11-foot pole and then stealing everything worthwhile that isn't glued onto them. What do you mean that's not the only way you can play Munchkin? Anyway, the problem comes when either we're too generous with rewarding our players, or a campaign has gone on for a really long time, or we have really persistent hoarders in the party. So, here's a bunch of ways in which you can solve this imbalance and have some fun with it. Okay, so tip number 1. It's not just players and NPCs and cute fluffy animals, which your barbarian is inevitably going to try murdering.
It's a monster! Kill it! Kill it!
That have the ability to have hit points. Items can also have hit points. Yes, you can actually give items durability. This can be in the shape of how often they're used, or how much wear and tear they gradually build up over time, or even if the items can have their own vulnerabilities or resistances. This sort of information even comes in the Dungeon Master's Guide on page 246 to 47. So using this, you can easily give your objects an armor class, give your objects a hit point. Maybe you want your gear to be eventually destructible. Maybe you want to age those items as they are used throughout a campaign so that eventually they're less reliable. Maybe, just maybe, you want to bide your time while your players think that they're safe with that brand new +2 bow that they just got, and eventually you plan to rip it from them and have it break in the most unfortunate moment possible. Either way, there are options. And this also means that gear doesn't have to be consistent through a campaign. Maybe players will have to search out for things as replacements. Maybe they'll have to fix their gear. It's entirely up to you, but it does allow you to make sure that gear that they have, maybe they're overpowered, maybe gear is having a little bit too much of an effectiveness against all of the monsters that you're putting up against them, but it has that ability to be slowly changed and molded to suit your needs, the party's needs, and address that inevitability of imbalance or overpoweredness. Or maybe you just really don't want your wizard wandering around with a staff that basically shoots endless fireballs. Another way that you can address hoarders is dependent on currencies. Now, I know that a lot of games don't tend to really hyper-focus on how much money a party's spending, because let's be fair, maths in the best of times is not fun. But hear me out, a lot of hoarders tend to end up with a small fortune that they never let go of. And they just gather money and money and money, and then everything is within their means. And this can be game breaking. It means they can have access to ridiculously powerful items that basically make your game pointless because they're ultimately god level. So with this in mind, think about how much things cost. Raise the costs of items dependent on your party's gold. Think about all the things that you could actually charge for. You know, not just whether or not they need room and board, whether or not they need supplies, but think about things like travel expenses. Maybe they need rare resources for that particular quest that only one person in a far-off land sells. If it's a rare resource, maybe they need to barter. Maybe they need to bribe someone to get it on the black market because it's actually really illegal, and therefore you have to charge an extortionate amount of money to get the item. Maybe an expert's needed for it to actually be achieved. For example, a good one a friend came up with for their game was to require an expert for teleportation. They needed specific resources. They needed someone who actually had knowledge. I mean, the length of time that that person probably had to study to be able to install teleportation points is probably a significant amount of time. So therefore, that ups the price. It's a rare skill. It's going to keep on adding up costs, and therefore meaning that your party are going to actually have to spend some of their hoard. Maybe they don't even have enough gold and they have to sell some items of equivalent value. This in itself gets rid of more pointless gear that they've somehow got their grimy little hands on and have squirreled away that you've totally forgotten about, that you gave them months ago, and has just been burning a hole in their pockets. Now, this next point may be a bit drastic, but sometimes desperate times call for desperate measures. Now, I would attempt to try some of the other points before doing this, but it depends on how evil you're feeling, how much your party has pissed you off, and how much you just really, really want to have a clean start. But there is always the option of a total party inventory wipe. It's kind of like a TPK, but you're just stealing all of their valuable items, making them go out into the world on their own again, completely naked and alone, thinking about how they got themselves into such a desperate situation. And it also kind of throws things back up in the air, reduces their sense of safety. It can make things fresh again, depending on how long your campaign's been going for. So, consider getting the party imprisoned. Likelihood is they've done something morally questionable and deserve to be imprisoned at some point during the campaign. Maybe have them robbed. Rogues aren't just for the party, they're for NPCs too. And I guarantee one of your rogues at some point has tried stealing everything from the party members themselves. So why not have an NPC do it for them? You could always have a natural disaster that means that they have to leave in a moment's notice, lose half of their gear. Maybe they get sucked up in a tornado or a flood and drop a bunch of precious items. Whatever floats your boat. Or not so. Maybe, just maybe, they have a terrible freak smelting accident or teleportation malfunction that doesn't end up in killing the actual party, because that's no fun. But does, however, mold all of their gear together so it is completely and utterly unusable. Now, this may not help you if you've already allowed your players to slip into their pesky loot goblin ways, but You do not have to give loot for every fight. You do not actually have to reward players every single time they manage to murder something that you put in front of them. In fact, it is encouraged in things like Xanathar's Guide to Everything to not give your party too much loot, to give them just enough that it's rewarding, but not so much that they end up having a overloaded inventory full of useless items that they are never going to have any opportunity to use.
It's a complete array of vacuum cleaner attachments.
Or the forethought to actually use the items that you've given them in the scenarios that you are putting them in, which totally doesn't happen at all. But there is an argument for rewarding your players very selectively, making it feel like magic items or top-end loot is actually really worth it. They've really earned it. It's not so enjoyable if you're giving them loot every single time they beat something and it just kind of going into their inventory again. You could even not give them loot unless they actively say that they are looting the corpses, which in itself brings up some heavy moral questions, but, you know, D&D. You could even start dropping cursed items so they become a little bit more paranoid and a little less greedy. But this obviously is difficult to enact if your party are already carrying a whole heck ton of items. So think about this from point one rather than midway through. Now, I said that there's going to be maybe a sneaky bonus piece of advice. And this is something that may be a very, very questionable piece of advice that not many people are going to enjoy. But hear me out. Hear me out. Don't give your party a bag of holding. Just don't. Don't do it. I know it's tempting. If you've already done it, you're done goofed. Because it's just going to end up in a horrendous situation where they've got an endless supply of loot that they are never going to use. And if you have given them a bag of holding, turn it into a mimic. Have the mimic eat it all. No, you want to. So that was 4 tips that I thought might be helpful in dealing with your loot goblins, and a cheeky extra piece of advice just for you. But what do you think would be a good way to separate aspiring dragon players from their hordes? Will you be using any of these suggestions in your next campaign? What's something that you yourself are guilty of hoarding? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, I will see you all soon. Say bye all! Thanks to our Ko-Fi members for supporting the channel and allowing us to do this kind of stuff outside of streaming. And maybe you want to hang around and check out one of these lovely videos that's just popped up on your screen.
Oh,